Christoph Huermann from Denationalized.me here. I haven't made any YouTube videos for a while because we have more than enough to do with our products and consultations, helping interested people move abroad. Now we have a new offer, Residency in Paraguay. In itself, it's an old offer that we've been doing for years. I myself did my permanent residency in Paraguay in 2017, and we also had immigration support on site. But now we have decided with our Brazilian team to set up our own service locally because we can simply pay better attention to quality and can also offer additional services locally such as a tax number and other important things. This residency in Paraguay continues to be very interesting. There were some changes. Back then, I immediately got permanent residency for a $4,000 bank deposit, which only required me to travel to Paraguay every 10 years. I haven't been there for a long time now. The new conditions are a little more difficult, but in some cases also easier. On the one hand, you no longer need that $4,000 bank deposit, which is almost 27,500,000 guarani. You can save that now. Back then, you needed an apostilled degree. You don't need that anymore. You can simply enter the country with the right documents. An apostilled certificate of good conduct and an apostilled birth certificate. Apostille is essentially the highest form of state certification. Simply apply, spend around 3 days in Paraguay and become a temporary resident. And in itself that's not a big difference from permanent residency. Paraguay just no longer wants to award permanent residency immediately. You can still achieve this. You have to invest $70,000 in Paraguay and create jobs. But that doesn't make much sense, because otherwise you only have to wait 2 years and don't have to be there during that time and then come back after 2 years to apply for permanent residency. In other words, you travel once and do the process on site. The entire process then takes several months, but can be accelerated for each document for a small additional fee. So you're on site for a maximum of 3 or 4 days to complete the process and leave again. We receive your temporary residency and after 21 months at the earliest, later is possible too, you come back and apply for permanent residency. So it's not like you need 3 or 4 visits to Paraguay. Theoretically, you now simply need 2 visits for permanent residency and the second visit does not take place after a few months like before, but 2 years later. Permanent residency is of course better in itself because it simply offers you more advantages in Paraguay and a more permanent place of residence that cannot be so easily restricted. But in itself, the temporary residency is completely sufficient and allows you to live in Paraguay permanently if you want. Or to just use Paraguay as a plan B if you don't want to live there. Paraguay has some weaknesses that certainly have to be mentioned. Paraguay is considered a particularly high-risk country for international banks. In other words, if you want to use Paraguay as your compliance residency and submit the tax number, apartment or rental agreement in Paraguay, you have to expect to be terminated or rejected because Paraguay has a particularly high money laundering risk. This makes Paraguay not an ideal residency for compliance purposes, but you can of course still use it as a kind of residency permit for your plan B if there ever was a global emergency. The next World War, pandemic or something similar. As a small, unknown, largely self-sufficient country, Paraguay is a relatively good place to stay and ride it out. So, if you are a perpetual traveler looking for a residency, then Paraguay certainly makes sense. It's not ideal to declare Paraguay to the banks, but you can solve that somewhere else in the world. And still get that residency in Paraguay. We'll make more videos about that. If you want to live in Paraguay, then other points come into play. I will make a video about that as well. For instance, a video about the use of companies abroad. Is this still tax-free in Paraguay? Yes, Paraguay is taxed territorially, foreign income is tax-free. This can be analyzed in more depth. I'll do that in the next video. The main point is that the mere residency permit does not trigger any tax liability. So you are only liable to pay taxes in Paraguay if you actually live there. According to national law, that is 120 days of living there. So only when you are actually there for 4 months a year will you be subject to tax and have this territorial taxation. Otherwise, it is simply one of many residency permits that can protect you in the long term. and it can create short-term advantages, but is not ideal as a compliance residency. And yes, I'll say that's it. It is still relatively easy. Yes, we always say get the relevant residencies as early as possible because things constantly change. You saw that in Panama, and now in Paraguay. The changes in Paraguay were not only negative, but also partly positive. The bank deposit has disappeared. You just don't get permanent residency straight away, which is bearable. If you are interested in Paraguay, I opened a website here. Everything is there: what we do, how we do it, and the costs. What is very important is that substantial steps in the process have changed and therefore the costs increased. There are still some providers who offer Paraguay for the old costs, which were usually only around €1,500. The problem is that they still have the flawed process. It can't be represented that way. Yes. I think some immigration helpers in Paraguay don't really know what exactly has changed. That perhaps you should now take a look at the law, speak Spanish, and contact a lawyer who can implement everything properly. It used to be possible to obtain residency in Paraguay extremely cheaply. We continue to offer it relatively cheaply. Many law firms now charge up to $5,000 for temporary residency in Paraguay. So don't let that unsettle you. Paraguay residency is still a great solution. It is relatively easy to get with professional support. Our team does this in English, Spanish, and Portuguese because they are Brazilian. Not in German. If you want German immigration helpers, they are available. We also have some recommendations, and who not to recommend, but let's discuss that in person. Just write to us at christoph@denationalize.me. Go to the website. Check out our offer on how you can continue to get residency in Paraguay. As I said, in the next videos I'll tell you a lot more about the Paraguayan residency and how it relates to our popular American LLCs, for example. It is a very good solution. I recommend it to everyone because it doesn't cost much. Fly there once, do it once, and then have it in your back pocket. Additional residency permits are never a bad thing. They always offer you great advantages in the uncertain future.